Ready to unlock the secrets of the unseen? At Paranormal M, we dive deep into the unexplained, sharing authentic stories that will leave you questioning the world around you. Subscribe and tap that notification bell to join the exploration. That time I did security in a haunted building. First off, I know not all believe in otherworldly things. No cheese off my biscuit. You do you. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. I can only share what I experienced for myself and leave you to draw your own conclusions. I'm assigned to an extended coverage over the better part of a year in a 100-year-old haunted building in the downtown area of our major city. I will spend most of my weekend nights patrolling while they're in the process of reconstruction and asbestos removal. Every weekend, I arrive to find different areas inaccessible due to asbestos abatement or other construction needs. The project takes longer as a fair amount of the building is being actively used by businesses, which makes the reconstruction trickier. Many of the changes being made are a postmodern insult to the classic features of the building. It hurts my heart to watch the beautiful and elegant appointments give way to the new stylish and moronic ones. The bathrooms had solid granite stall dividers. Now they feature mundane modern metal ones. Classic 100-year-old chandeliers get replaced by LED moon ring lights. It's like putting bright lipstick and rave glasses on the Mona Lisa. At the beginning of the construction, there are two side hallways that remain intact from the original build-out of the building, and that feature the original office config. They'll both be destroyed before the construction is finished. One of them is on the 12th floor, and even on the brightest light of day, that particular corridor is oppressive and creepy. You simply cannot get enough light into that space to make it feel bright and cheery. Now, I am told by the tenants and staff of various deaths associated with the building over its 100-year history. The lawyer shot by his jilted lover on the top floor. It was the long-forgotten trial of the century from the same century that saw the O.J. Simpson case. She was also acquitted, despite having confessed to doing it. The young woman in white who purportedly tried to fly from the roof and failed. The 3-year-old who cries in the basements, something to do with childhood measles, I'm told. But nowhere do I find any reports that feature the 12th floor. That notwithstanding, there's something dark and brooding in that corridor. If the light is out, down that hall at night, I shine my flashlight down it and move on quickly. The full moon. Now there's one particularly active night, by which I mean the whole building seems to be vibrating with energy and strange things afoot. It is the 13th of the month, and a full moon at that. The wheeled scaffolding in one area under construction is in a different location on every patrol. I never see or hear it move, but it's all over the place that night. Now this has happened before, and it remains a creepy curiosity, but this night, it was just more than normal. On the second to top floor, I can see what appears to be the shadow of another person coming up behind me, and from the position of its head relative to my own head, there may be 5 feet, 1.5 meters away, when I spin around and see nothing. Just an empty hallway. Looking back the other way, the second shadow's gone, and so I go on down quickly to the 12th floor. As I walk down the long main corridor toward the old creepy side corridor, I feel like I'm being watched. I look down that creepy pit of darkness without any use of a light, and there to my horror, see in the blackest black against the black, the shadow figure of a man standing in the middle of the hall with his head flopped to one side in the most unnatural way. If not for it being at eye level, it really looks like a hanging man. With no hesitation, I shine my flashlight down the hall to get a better look and see. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. I lower the flashlight again, and now it's just a black hallway. The figure does not reappear in the returning darkness. I've had enough of this corridor for the night. I will not patrol it again this shift. I turn to go down the stairs to the 11th floor. I have this intense feeling that I should watch my step, like someone or something wishes to push me down the stairs. I grip the rails on both sides as I descend. A few steps down, I feel a gust of air on my back. There is nothing in the building that can produce a draft on these stairs. This weekend is the only time I ever feel a gust of air on any of the stairs in the building. But now, while feeling like I need to watch my step, I do. In the early morning, shortly after sunrise, I turn the keys over to my relief for the next 12 hours. I say nothing to him of the events of the night. When I return 12 hours later for my next shift, he shares with me having felt unsafe on one of the stairs in the building and even feeling wind on his back. He can't figure out where it came from. I ask him which stairs. Of course, it's the same stairs from the 12th floor to the 11th floor where I had felt it the night before. My first patrol that night, I again feel unsafe on that stair and a much smaller puff of air at the back of my head. I turn and yell, "You've got to do better than that if you really want to scare me." Nothing else happens this shift. The building returns again to its quiet and calm. Afterwards, until they tear out this creepy corridor to replace it with a modern office configuration, I always make sure to get all the lights down and have them turned on before the sun goes down. Some 4 months later, I learned from one of the tenants that a man had hung himself in that hall on the 12th floor during the 1930s. Somehow, this news came as no surprise to me. Meanwhile, the scaffolding still moves around at night, even when no one's in the building to move it. I once or twice hear a crying sound in the basement. The first time I think it might have been a cat, but the building manager assures me that there are no cats. It's the 3-year-old ghost, he says. He also says he doesn't believe in ghosts, so... One tenant relates being approached on the top floor by a dapper old gentleman in a very outdated suit who simply vanishes before saying anything. He thinks it is the shot lawyer. I never see anything there. The floor feels at peace. If he is there, he's not as upset about things as the hangman on the 12th floor. Now, when they do start to dismantle that original hallway on the 12th floor, the creepy presence brooding down there becomes rather more active and a bit less predictable. I now feel it increasingly out in the main corridor that still remains essentially unchanged from the original build. At first, it feels angry towards me. It wants me scared and it wants me hurt. I dread going to that floor on every patrol. Some patrols I take the elevator from the floor above or below, look out at that floor and then go to the next floor and leave it at that. Then I start to feel it in the middle of the main corridor in front of the elevators waiting for me. If I take the stairs down, I always feel the malicious presence wanting me to slip, trip, or fall down those stairs. But to be honest, I hate going there for a completely different reason, too. I can't begin to express how much I dislike the tacky changes that they're making to this classic building. It feels like a violation of her beautiful turn-of-the-century soul. On one occasion, when the creepy, brooding presence seems to be absent, I look over what they're doing to the space, and that's mostly been the side corridor, and I shake my head and honestly weep a little bit. It's such an affront. Suddenly I realize I'm not alone. That unseen being is there, but it's no longer angry toward me. It seems to have decided I'm not part of the problem, but feels the same way about the changes as it does. Follows me down 2 more floors before it withdraws. As it leaves, it feels to me like it just can't stay away from the 12th floor. Its floor for very long at all. This changes my patrol for the remainder of my time I'm working at this site. It's never again an angry, creepy experience to visit that floor. Despite the door next to the new office in the area of the old side corridor constantly unlocking itself, I have to relock it at least 3 times a night. I often feel its presence a floor or 2 before the 12th floor, and it stays with me for a floor or 2 after. Sometimes I feel thoughts in my head. It's sort of like the experience I often get, where I'm about to open my mouth and say something, just to have a friend or sibling say the exact same thing, like they had thought of it first, and I had somehow gotten it from them before they spoke. Or like the way I always know when my children are lying to me. They really hate that. It feels like the being wants me to know that he hadn't killed himself. This was done to him by others. This is repeated often, but then a few months later, a quiet admission. I did it. I can't take it back. Accompanied by a wave of a feeling of sorrow, regret, and remorse. Then it feels like it wants me to leave here and maybe go home with me. I simply say, that will never work. My family won't want you around. The floor feels very sad the rest of that shift. I look into it. I can never find his name or likeness in the full story of his hanging, only the rumor shared by a tenant of his death. I never have a name to call him by. Since this particular contract ended, I never been back to the building. I suspect if I ever do return, I'll still have a strange friend waiting for me there. Skinwalker Summer. Before I was born, there was a systemic program that destroyed Native American culture and ripped off the United States government while doing so. It was also victimizing many of those that intended it to serve. I speak now of the Native American Indian training schools or boarding schools set up by various churches and government entities in the United States during the 19th and first half of the 20th century. The goal was both assimilation and elimination. Teach the Native Americans housed in the school how to be good Christians and Americans with useful skills and abilities with English, but at the same time suppress their own language, religion, and culture, and get paid by the state to do it. Now don't get me wrong, there's some good that came out of the system. There were job opportunities that became available to graduates that they would never have had otherwise, but the cost to benefit was ultimately not worth it. Many participants were victimized in every way that a child can be victimized. In my own ever-be-humble opinion, the best thing to come out of this program was the rejection of forced assimilation and the resurgence of interest in traditional languages, cultures, and religions. But like I said, this was way before I was born. During my life, there was a weak continuation of the program in many areas of the country. Some churches continued to propagate a Christianization of Native Americans by offering their children placement in good Christian homes during the school year, where they could get a white man's education. Yes, that's the term they used, and it is offensive, and learn English as well as be taught quote-unquote proper religion. This program has now been largely discontinued. Current efforts are to build up the educational opportunities available to the reservations to where a proper education is available to all. I have personally volunteered time and money to such enterprises and will continue to do so. Early years. In my early years growing up, my 2 older sisters often complained about seeing things in the house that freaked them out, that none of the rest of us saw. I personally thought it was all in their heads, because whenever I would come in the room, they claimed it would stop. I never saw anything. I won't venture to describe much what they did. That's their story to tell if they ever care to. Let's just say they were frequent mentions of floating eyes and disembodied heads and faces. Again, I never saw any of that. But I did end up spending many nights vigil on the floor of one of their rooms as a preventative. I honestly suspected that it related to maybe confirming a peeping Tom issue that we had in the neighborhood that seemed aimed at the little girls in our street. This detail frames our initial responses to the event that this post describes, as well as some of the aftermath. The setup. When my older sister Layla was 12 years old, she made a friend at school. Lily is from the Navajo Nation reservation in the Four Corners area where Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona all touch. It's the only place in the United States where 4 states come together, and a bit of a tourist trap moneymaker for the Navajo Nation who owns the place, where it happens to be. I visited it once. It's pretty cool to get your picture taken with each foot and hand in each different state. Worth the cost to visit at least once in your life, and believe me, the money goes to good ends. Lily is living with a good Christian family for the school year, and she and Layla did off. In previous posts on other subreddits, I've described how my mother, Canary, was a Christian missionary to Japan, who ended up doing research and writing books in both English and Japanese, that they were not particularly Christian in nature. We were raised with Japanese actively spoken in our home and at gatherings and activities outside of our home. Many of my parents' friends were Japanese. We were taught to respect the language, religion, and culture of others, period. Didn't matter which ones. And so, as Lily learns better English, Layla learns some Navajo. As Lily and Layla share religious experiences in a Christian context, Layla learns from Lily the ways of her religion, and it's mutually enriching. But then the school year draws to an end, and Lily's to return home a few states away. Layla's distraught. Canary opens discussions with Lily's mother, and it's decided that Layla will go home with Lily, since there's room on the bus taking many young Navajos back home. They will return together in the fall when the new school year starts. And so begins a pattern that will continue for much of Layla's remaining years of grade school. Lily never lives with us. We're not considered a suitable host family for a number of reasons. But she always returns to the same family, so she remains in the same school. Layla spends her summers on the reservation, and boy, she comes back home tanned. But even with the natural darkening of the skin, her blonde hair made blonder by that same exposure to the sun, and blue eyes are impossible to hide. She's not of a dine, said Dinah. The trigger. When Layla is 17, she's helping Lily's family at a roadside stand where they sell much of their jewelry. Lily's family is famous for their silver and turquoise jewelry. What they don't sell to trading posts, they sell directly along the roadside. Something Lily made very clear from the beginning is that Layla would not be learning anything about making jewelry. Family secrets are family secrets, and even other Navajo families would like to learn her family's techniques. This is a multi-generational nope. But Layla can help this family sell wares, however. On this day, things did not go well. They make some good sells, that's not the issue. They have a visit from a person whom the family pays great deference. Layla has never seen them so respectful with anyone before. The visitor speaks no English, but is clearly very unhappy about the presence of my sister with the family. Her aspect is angry and indignant. While Layla barely understands what she says, the gist is understood. When the visitor is left, Lily's mother tells Layla, "Tomorrow you go home. I cannot protect you from this." And so, Layla returns home for a month early by Greyhound. She gives no explanation. It will be years until I get the full story that I'm sharing here. The consequence. About a week after Layla returns home, some things start to happen. To understand this part of the story, you need to understand a bit about the layout of our neighborhood. Our house is on a 3/4 acre, 0.3 hectare lot at the end of a circle with a farm on one side and a small river running behind it. At this time, the other side of the river is mostly fields and horse pastures. There's animals we normally see here. We have about 100 cats living in and around the property. We have dogs, we have frogs and muskrats and other creatures that need the river to live. We have snakes and every kind of insect that you can imagine. We're too far into the populated area to ever see any large predators, though. No mountain lions, no coyotes, no wolves, no bears, no foxes, not really even many raccoons. There are cows and horses in the neighborhood, and a rooster crow will wake us up most mornings. But this night, I'm awakened from a deep sleep by Layla. We all gather into the highest room in the house, the room where Layla sleeps when she's home. There is a howling in the breeze coming from somewhere beyond the river. I'm not clever enough to know the difference between wolf and coyote howls, but it's definitely along those lines. I've heard this song before, when on a survival camp in the desert. It came clear and crisp on the wind and woke me then. It was so cold at night in the desert. The fire was out, but the howls were far away, so no worries. Then a response came from the other side of us, and it was much too close for comfort. I didn't sleep again that night. And now something like that song is being sung here in town, where it has no business of being. And it's getting closer. At my oldest sister's instruction, we all join in prayer together. After that, I don't recall much more that night. I wake up in the morning on the floor in my sister's room. When asking about last night, no one will talk about it. I have a million questions, but will get no answers. And then night comes again. This time we're all gathered in my sister's room, and the sleeping bags are brought out. We pray together, and eventually drift off to Wonderland, only to be awoken by howling again, only much closer. I drift in and out of sleep. In the morning, there are scratch marks on the back door, only they're too high for a normal canine to have made, and they are deep and powerful. The Medicine Woman. This day, Layla is able to get Lily on the phone. After they talk, my oldest sister drives Layla somewhere, but again, no one is telling me anything. I'll later learn that Lily gave Layla the name of a medicine woman near us. Name and address, no phone number. Lily told her to tell the medicine woman what had happened on the reservation, and that a dog man had been sent. In the evening, Canary brings a priest to bless the house and each of us. After he leaves, my sister brings in a short old Navajo woman with a deep smile and a great deal of silver and turquoise, literally from head to foot. She wears a short round hat and has her hair in 2 long gray braids down both sides of her face. They go at least to her knees, have a lot of silver and turquoise woven in them as well. She has 3 bundles of smudge. One is definitely white sage, but I have no idea what the other 2 are. She smudges the house and each of us. She uses each of the bundles for different things. She chants and sings in Navajo the whole time. My sisters go into my sister's room with her, and you can hear talking and more singing. I'm not allowed to see it, and I've never spoken of it again. We again huddle in my sister's room that night. We pray together and sing church songs together. The old Navajo woman sits in a chair in the hall beside the back door and watches and listens and hums to herself. When the howling starts, she gets up and walks outside. Tonight, the howling stays distant. It never approaches. In the morning, the old woman smiles at me kindly. She says, 3 more. Layla explains that we all need to do it again for 3 more nights. And we do. Smudge and chant and songs and prayer. The howling seems further each night. The last night is not heard at all. Howling of that kind will never be heard again in my neighborhood. In the morning, Layla makes a gift to the old woman, some beautiful pieces of jewelry that Lily and her family had given to her over the years. They are accepted gracefully. Looking at one that had particular emotional importance to my sister, she shakes her head and hands it back. No. She keeps the rest. Her smile is rather deep at me as she leaves. I'll never see her again, but I can never forget her deep, pure smile. She was a force for good in the world. Later. When in later years, as I learned the rest of the story described above, I asked Layla to explain Dogman to me. She just smiles and says, that talking about it will invite it, and that it's not an invitation that she's making. She will speak no further about it. Layla and Lily continue to be as close as any sisters, but Lily will never allow Layla to return to live with her on the reservation ever again. She says it's too dangerous. Lily does eventually live with us. She lives rent-free while going to college. For all intents and purposes, she's my sister. I ask her once about this evening, and she smiles and chides me with one phrase that I hear most often from her: "You talk too much." She then tells me that this is not for me, and that's all I'm ever going to get from her on that matter. From what I've been able to gather from hearing my sister speak on the matter twice more over the years and just picking up things here and there, it seems that no matter where my sister went, this dog man would have found her, and it wouldn't have ended well. The medicine woman helped us by misdirecting it and sent it an impossible trail to follow and keep it busy. Until this assignment was replaced by a new one. I could be wrong about this, but that's what it sounded like to me. I have, of course, since heard of skinwalkers, and I now realize that this is a modern term for maybe what Lily was calling a dogman back in the day. It wasn't a term any of us had heard of when these events happened. I never saw it. I was never told too much about it. I'm not a source of any useful information on the topic, really. I can only relate what happened one summer many decades ago when my sister returned home unexpectedly early from the reservation. The aftermath. In the years after this event, my older sisters would move out and on with their lives. During the winter following these events, I start to wake up in my room from time to time to find a floating face of a beautiful woman over me. As gorgeous as she is terrifying, and in a flash it's gone. This only ever happened in the lower part of the house. In the highest part of the house, next to my sister's room where we gathered in those tense nights in August, there's a large family room. After these events, every time I take a nap on that sofa in that room, the sleep is fitful and disturbed. I have no history of sleep paralysis at this time, but now experience something like it. I wake up unable to move or speak, fight myself upright only to find that I'm dreaming and now awake, unable to move or speak, and the cycle would continue on like that. I sometimes fight for up to 6 layers of dreams of waking up until I'm actually awake and perfectly able to move and speak. More like a dream of sleep paralysis than the actual thing. As I'm drifting off to sleep on this sofa, I'll sometimes feel a weight on top of me. It often feels like it falls through me. I feel like I'm out of sync with my body and either floating over it or falling through it again and again and again. It's like a dream of falling and not falling at the same time. Yet at the same time, on the edge of the sleep, I hear a cacophony of voices chanting some indecipherable something that sounds like a black-masked clip of the Beatles. It is maybe 3 seconds long. Then it stops, and a few minutes later starts again. Sometimes in one ear, sometimes the other, sometimes both, but not in sync. This also happens a few times in the lower part of the house. I dread falling asleep on that sofa, and yet I seem to irresistibly drop off on it quite frequently. Nowhere else in the house do I experience this combination of odd dreams and sensations. I do not know if all this relates to the events of that summer. I only know that it never happened before and never stopped happening after for as long as I've lived in that house. Footsteps in the snow. This happened when I was younger, around 8 or 9. I grew up on a reservation in eastern Maine. I lived with my mother and brother who was younger. We lived in a 2-story multi-dwelling unit or public housing. Vast wooded area was in my backyard, surrounded by deep woods that wouldn't take much to get lost in. But I always enjoyed adventuring and it was very familiar with the territory. It was late winter with about 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground. I heard knocking on the front and back at the same time around 1 a.m. in the morning. I noticed it first. Then my mother got up and told my brother and I to stay in my room. She called the police and went down the stairs to see if someone was at the door. We kept hearing the knocking, but my mother got closer to the door and it suddenly stopped. No one she could see was visible outside the door, and police finally showed up. Lights lit up in front of our place. Neighbors came out to see what was going on, as we had 5 neighbors in our MDU. All of them said that they didn't hear or see anyone. Police searched around the property to see if anyone was hiding or ran off, but they didn't find anything. The cruisers stayed in our parking lot for a majority of the night in case anyone comes again. Sunrise came, and the officer had left early in the morning. My mother and the next-door neighbor went outside, I assumed, to talk about what had happened. Then she noticed it. The footprints in the snow that went along the building leading to our front door and the back all the way into the forest. But these footprints were strange. It's as if someone was wearing pointed boots, men's size between 10 to 12. The prints were inverted as if the toes were facing each other, not at an angle, either directly facing each other in a straight line. The creepiest part about them was the steps of the footprints moved side to side. Toes were inverted and looked as if they jumped like that, side to side in a perfect straight line leading into the woods. My mother didn't say anything about it till later on in life when I was older. But I knew that there was something obvious. I know what you're thinking. Maybe someone was playing a prank or faked it. These were other footprints in the snow around the strange ones. But only around the building. I assumed the other footprints were made by the officers due to the fact that they looked normal. But there were no other prints in the snow leading up to the tree line. I followed the prints into the woods. No other markings around them. Perfectly inverted side-to-side hops or steps in the snow leading deeper and deeper into the forest. I got to the point where an uneasy feeling crept over me, like something was telling me to go back. But I knew where the prints were leading. As I said, I was very familiar with the area, and eventually would have led into a marsh or a bog area. I got chilled by the thought that for some reason it might happen, so I turned back. I never said anything to my mother about it till later on. I never heard or encountered anything like it ever since. Possible paranormal event. Back in 2013, my family and I took a trip to Italy for my aunt's wedding. They had rented this huge, gorgeous Italian villa in Toscano, Villa di Olignano, to be exact, in case anybody wants to find pictures of the location to get a better idea. It's spelled Ulignano. The room I was staying in was a, let's try this, Napoleone Gialla, perhaps. The property owner told me Napoleon had stayed there in the 17th century, but I'm not sure if that's bullshit. And I'm not saying in any way I think that this was his spirit, by the way. The room was on the 2nd floor, and there were 2 floors below us, with the large dining room taking up the 1st and 2nd floor above the ground floor. Hopefully that provides some idea of the floor plan for the story. Anyways, one of the nights I went to bed pretty normal, like of course we weren't going to sleep around 12 or 1 due to the time zone change coming from the US, but other than that, I never had any issue sleeping. I can't remember what night exactly this was, but it was around halfway through the week-long stay. I had fallen asleep around the previous stated time, and almost as quickly as I fell asleep, I woke up downstairs on one of the small couch-like seats in the bottom floor of the dining room. My body was overcome with chills. I had this feeling of being watched the entire time, and I was just feeling super disoriented, mainly confused as to how I got there, as I've never been sleepwalking or anything like that. The strangest thing to me, however, was my trip back to my room. I had this constant feeling of eyes on me, and a sense of being followed, but that wasn't even the strangest to me. As I said before, the dining room took up the first floor and the second floor, the one that I was staying on. The second floor of the dining room being a balcony type thing running along the wall, but I wandered the single staircase for what seemed like minutes. I swear I walked up the stairs to the second floor and would just be on a completely different floor. I began to panic a bit, but eventually went up the stairs into my floor and booked it to my room. My phone said it was 4 a.m. I told a few family members the next day, but it was just disregarded. My family telling me that I was probably just tired and sleepwalking and all that, but I'm absolutely certain about what I thought happened truly did. The whole villa was a strange place. One of the side rooms on the ground floor housed a small chapel-like room with a bunch of maybe 3 or 4 feet tall religious figures, and an adjoining room with just a stone table in it. The trip just felt weird after that, and I couldn't have been happier to leave. A very weird coincidence with some history. So my house is pretty old. It's built in 1920. I've had some weird experiences here, but nothing as interesting as this. Between the ages of 6 and 8, I had at least 20 different experiences where I would be in my basement bathroom, either getting ready for school or, using the bathroom, when I would suddenly see a figure out of the corner of my eye in the mirror. It was around a 25-year-old man in a blue Navy sailor outfit, and he would always just stare back at me with a pale, blank expression before disappearing after a second or two. For some reason, this didn't scare me, not even whatsoever, and as a kid, I never felt like it was evil or a malicious being. I didn't even tell my parents about it. It just kind of accepted it as an like an everyday thing. So as I get older, this phenomenon stops happening to me, and I kind of just store it away in the back of my memory. Until one very interesting Saturday morning in 2018. I'm 22 years old at this time, and I was in that same basement bathroom getting ready for the day when my mom called me upstairs. I go up to talk to her. She tells me that earlier in the day she was enjoying her morning tea on the front porch when an older man approached our house. He described himself as a sort of local historian who was researching veterans of World War II in my town. He went on to tell my mom that through his research he discovered that one of the first U.S. deaths in the war was a Navy sailor who originally lived in my house before going off to war. Apparently, he was one of the first to die during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He told my mom that he would come back with more research on this guy, but he has never since returned. My mom knows I'm kind of a history geek, and I thought that I'd love hearing about a little bit of World War II history with our home. As she tells me about this, a flood of memories come to my mind about me being a child and seeing that pale man in the mirror stare at me. Since then, I've told my parents about those childhood experiences, but nothing else weird has happened, and the local historian has never returned. I've always heard that children are more susceptible to coming into contact with the supernatural. That would explain why that only happened to me as a kid. Was it an evil being? Was it the spirit of that sailor just checking in on his old home? I'm not sure, but I still always get a little bit freaked out when I walk into that room and look into the mirror. Getting freaky under a blood moon. Would not recommend. So this happened about 5 years ago, and it hasn't left my mind since. It never occurred to me to post anything about it because I thought people would think I'm insane, but here we go. So me and my girlfriend at the time were having a bit of a stale point in our relationship. We thought we would do something to spice it up, so we decided to go to a large, stately home turned museum near where I lived. Just to give you an idea of where the area looked like before I go any further, it was a huge 3-story house that a duke or a lord would have lived in. And opposite it, there was a large path with trees along the side of the path, a field on the other side, and a forest at the end of the path. So, me and my girlfriend, who I'm going to be referring to as C for the rest of this, walked down the path to find a nice quiet spot. Now, take into account, this was at around 11 or 12 p.m., so it's pitch black. I believe they mean 11 p.m. or 12 a.m., so it's pitch black other than the reddish moon in the sky. So we put down a blanket and start to talk. As soon as things start getting a little bit frisky, I hear something coming from the end of the path that sounds like a town crier's bell. I sit up, confused, as it seems to be coming towards us, but there's nothing there. There was a bush next to me, and as soon as I sat up, it was like something big moved in it. So I jumped up and went into fight mode, hearing what sounds like multiple voices in the bush, the bell still going off. When I jump up, I looked around to see if I could see anything. And this was where things got real weird. Being able to see the field in between the trees, there were figures standing in the field, spaced out, but they were wearing what looked like black KKK uniforms, and they didn't look real. And the way that they didn't look solid, looking at them was like looking at liquid. They seemed to phase in and out. It's very difficult to describe it. At this point, I grab C up from the floor and I say, "We need to go now." And we start to make our way out of the field. While we're walking, I look to my right and see a circle of those people just standing in our direction, and start to hear a real heavy footstep coming from behind us. We start to run and it's like something grabbed C's bag. There's no bushes or trees for at least 30 feet, so it wasn't that. But we get out and we look back, and it's like it was slashed with a knife right through the strap. It wasn't like the clip had broken, it was straight through. Getting Kinky Under a Blood Moon, Part 2. I'd like to preface this post with confirmation that I was not and never have been on drugs. I don't suffer from any mental conditions, and I'm otherwise in tip-top shape apart from some Christmas weight that's been around for about 4 years. Back to the story. So me and C, my girlfriend at the time, spoke about what happened about a week after, just skirting around it. But not wanting to talk about any of it, as we spoke, I realized that we had both seen almost exactly the same things. She also saw the figures in the field, and when I went back there the following morning, there was nothing that could have been mistaken for them in the dark. No hedges, no bushes, nothing. I also spoke to one of my friends about it, and he didn't believe a word of it, so we decided to go back with torches and see what we could find. His name's going to be B. My other friend who joined us we'll be referring to as J, and C brought her best friend L. I went and picked up B and J, and planned to meet them at the entrance of the grounds. We were laughing and joking about what we were going to find, and I was wondering if what I saw was even real, but I was feeling a hell of a lot more confident with my two buddies by my side. As we approached the entrance, we saw C and L sprint out towards us, both of their faces showing that they were real scared of something. After about 5 minutes of calming them down, they told us that they were planning on hiding down at one of the side paths and jumping out to scare us. But Elle found something touching her hair. She assumed it was a tree branch or something until something grabbed her hair as if it was trying to pull her back. She managed to get out, and as they ran, something threw 3 sticks after her. I had a look down the side path, but I didn't find anything. Can't verify any of that, as I wasn't there for the moving part. It'll all be from my own perspective, I guess, let's say, and what I saw and what I heard. We started to make our way back into the ground, and we began walking toward the spot that we had last time, saw nothing, where nothing happened, but where we saw the figures. No figures stood in the field, no noises, nothing I remember, but it was deathly quiet, almost too quiet. It was so unnerving. This is when I shine my torch across the tree line of the forest, and I can see a figure of a really tall man. The best way I can describe it is like Slender Man with a human face, and he sunk into the floor as if his legs were sliced off at the knees. It was a fucking strange encounter, and I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. Again, I turned my torch off, and I was able to see him so much clearer, and he slowly turned around and walked into the forest, almost trying to lure me in. I looked at my friends, and no one else had seen. We started moving as a group down toward the small stream that's near where the forest meets the path, and I realized C is missing. I start freaking out, and she comes sprinting out of the forest, white as fuck, and tells me that she saw a man that beckoned her to come into the forest, and it was like she didn't have any control of herself. She went into the forest and snapped out of it when she saw something grab her shoulder, making her realize how far into the forest that she had went, and she sprinted out. At this point, I tell everyone else to wait near the stream, and I start walking further in with B, and I heard something that still rattles through my head from time to time. It was a growl, borderline roar, but it was nothing like any of the wildlife that we have. It sounded angry, and the worst part, it came from the sky. I could tell it wasn't echoing off of anything, and it was just coming from the sky. That was more than enough for me and all of us to get the fuck out of there. Never spoke a word again of it, and I'll never go back. It wasn't a forest fire. This event occurred back in 2001. I want to say, as I was still in college at NMSU at that time. It was fall, and me and 3 other friends decided to take a camping trip up to Gila National Forest. There was snow on the ground at our campsite, so it must have been mid to late fall. Anyway, we decided to take a day trip to go to a remote lake that I know was a very picturesque and serene place. It took a while to get up there, but once we were there, it was great. Until the storm came. It seemed like it came out of nowhere, and it was on top of us in a ridiculously short time. We didn't even make it back to my Jeep before sleet was pelting us. Once we were in the Jeep, we figured we'd be better back at the campsite, so we headed back down the winding trail, in 4 low, mind you, because by now the ground was beginning to freeze over. While we were driving through the forest trail on an iced road, tons of animals started running out across the path from left to right, and in that direction only. There were deer, elk, raccoons, rabbits, skunk. But that was weird in itself. But when we got to the small one-road town between the mountain and our campsite, we saw something weirder. 6 black military-style vehicles with tarp-like coverings on the cargo areas were all driving in a convoy back up towards where we had just come from. No idea what they were doing going back up to that remote, stormy location. We finally arrived back at our campsite, and we immediately noticed a huge orange glow on the horizon. Just over the area of the lake that we were at, it looked like a forest fire, except it didn't taper off at the ends like a fire would, and it vanished after about 2 hours. Forest fires do not do that. So, what the heck? After the weird fire-looking light disappeared, we started seeing long white streaks in the sky above us that would disappear and reappear in counts of 3, 4, 2, and 5 and alternate. This freaked out the 2 guys to the point that they retired to the tent, But me and the other dude stayed up staring at these white light streaks for some time before they vanished into the night. Needless to say, we were more than eager to pack up and head back home in the morning. One last curious thing is that we stopped at a cafe on the way back to civilization to gas up and use the restroom. Outside the cafe were copies of the daily newspaper that read, "Solar flares seen in night sky." Really, I'm no expert, but I don't think our encounter that night was very indicative of solar flares. Oz? Zozo? I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. Our town was actually founded in the late 19th century. In fact, the cemetery where we would go play Ouija had gravestones that had birth dates starting in the 1800s. When I was about 14, I got into the idea of Ouija in the spiritual world, just reading about it all the time. I'm not a very religious person, but the opportunity to speak with beings who have passed over will never not fascinate me. So it was around then that I and a couple of my friends made our own board out of the box of my Guitar Hero. I drew the letters and words on it with a Sharpie, and we used a shot glass as the glass piece. I still have it in my parents' garage to this day, as a matter of fact. There were many, many times that we had older siblings drive us out in the graveyard at night so we could play. I want to share the name of it with you guys so you can look it up for yourselves. There's fucking videos on YouTube of the cemetery that I played Ouija in as a teenager. So just let me know if you do, and I can DM you for privacy reasons. It's pretty weird to see the name of your hometown in the titles of scary YouTube videos. But anyways, I just want to tell you guys the reason why I began taking it so seriously, and then the story that made me stop playing Ouija for years. There were 5 of us, and I was always the one asking questions. We would bring a big quilt for us to sit on, white candles and a lighter. Our board and piece. We'd hold hands and ask if anybody wanted to talk with us, sharing that we'd love to talk with them. And then begin. 2 of my friends who were too scared to play would just watch, and the rest of us had fingers on the piece. The second time we ever played, I asked the person that we were speaking to if they were buried there in the graveyard, and they said yes. I asked them their name, and they gave us initials, EKW. We said politely that we wanted to stop talking so we could go find a gravestone. We moved it to goodbye, and then we stood up, all pulled out our phones to use flashlights, and sort of started walking around the graveyard looking for EKW. After several minutes, one of my friends yelled, "Guys?" The rest of us ran over to my friend who was standing there frozen, and there it was, EKW. She had died sometime in the 1920s. All 5 of us started freaking out, yelling, "Hi, EKW, thanks for talking with us." We decided that was enough Ouija for the night. Let's end it on a positive note. Fast forward to a couple of years later, when I could drive. I had a tiny-ass manual Mitsubishi Eclipse, but she was the best first car ever, and we're still playing Ouija, mostly in the summers. I had the same few friends in a group through most of high school, but these girls were the most fun. Nobody else would follow me to the graveyard to talk to dead people as the sun goes down. So one night, we had our usual setup, and had already had a conversation with 2 of some peeps. Then we said aloud that we wanted to speak with someone new, anyone. We wanted to make a new friend like EKW. Someone said hello, we said hi back. I asked this time its name. It said Oz. I thought, Oz? That's a weird one. But we kept dicking around with him. And then I asked him if we should be afraid of him. He said yes. I told him we were going to leave. He said no. Then the piece started moving back and forth between O and Z. I said, "Dude, I know your name is Oz. We get it." Then this fucker started moving down the alphabet, getting faster and faster. I remember that I had to read that when the piece is moving down the alphabet. It's a bad sign. I can mean the spirit that you're speaking with is pissed off or trying to come out of the board, whatever that means. I told my friends that we have to physically move it to goodbye, not let it keep sliding across the board, so we did. I picked up the piece and slammed it down on top of the goodbye. We all looked at each other. One of us said, "Yeah, let's leave." So we did. I grabbed the board and the piece. My friend started grabbing the candles and folding the quilt. We began walking back to my car. You know that feeling you get where something could be following you, but as long as you walk and don't run, you won't freak yourself out? I'm laughing while typing this, but thinking about it, 2 of them were already in my car, pulling the front seats forward and climbing into the back of my little 2-door shit queen. I was almost out of the cemetery, about to walk through the gate when I hear running footsteps behind me. I didn't even think about looking back. I let out a screech and started sprinting. I was about 10 feet away from my car, and I probably reached that hoe in like 4 strides. I was booking it that hard. I ain't even fast either. My manual that wishes she were an automatic wouldn't start. I kept stomping on the clutch and brake, and finally my key turned, all while my friends are screaming at me, "Go, bitch, go!" It's a gravel pathway only big enough for 1 car at the time that we have to drive up and down to get in and out of the graveyard. My poor baby was fishtailing, and I was moving so fast. It's so dark, too. There's only 1 street light near the graveyard, and it's right at the entrance at the turnoff from the main road. We were surrounded by nothing but trees and the dim moonlight. So, we got back to our friend's mom's house, and we're all practically yelling at her in the kitchen about what had just happened. She called us idiots and said that she doesn't want to have that shit in her house. So, I took it back outside and put it in the trunk of my car. I didn't have the feeling that I was being watched anymore, but I just felt different. I don't know how to explain it. I went back inside and they were already looking up the name Oz and Ouija. Twice I've heard random noises in my home. I rent a house, and so far, I've never really had any bad vibes. It just feels great, to be honest, and I love it here. I've previously lived in potentially haunted houses before and had weird vibes and places, so I certainly know the difference between a welcome home and an uncomfortable one. However, on occasion, twice now, I've heard mysterious noises. Only this afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing food for myself. I was home alone when I heard a loud chatter from somewhere in the house, but I couldn't pinpoint to any one room. It was loud enough to think something moderately heavy had fallen and perhaps clattered against something. Like multiple items clattering together, if that makes any sense. Perhaps books or CDs falling off a shelf, or maybe my son's toys. My first thought was maybe my child had stacked something awkwardly on his desk and then something had knocked them off. But I checked and all of his toys were fine, nothing had fallen. I also perhaps thought that maybe some clothes had fallen off the coat hangers and perhaps landed on something. I checked the bedrooms, the living room, etc. Absolutely nothing had fallen or been disturbed. But this isn't the first time. The very same thing happened about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was having a smoke at the back door of the house and heard a load of tumbling, crashing sounds, but couldn't locate the source. I know it's not an intruder. The house is tiny and I've checked everywhere. No cellar, sealed off attic, etc. I've no pets. My son wasn't home. It genuinely sounded like a phantom noise, loud enough to make me jump, so that rules out any sounds coming from the neighbors. I never heard either neighbor. The walls are quite thick. There's nothing in the back garden that could have made the noise either, nor from the front street, which is generally quiet. Utterly baffled. What makes it weirder is that I couldn't tell if the sound came from upstairs or downstairs, just somewhere very close, like a room or 2 away. That said, even after that, I still feel safe here, so I don't think it's anything malignant. I should also add I was sober both times it's happened. spirit, maybe? I'm 18, turning 19 on April 14th, and I work in dining at a large retirement home. I would say there's anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 people. I've worked there since July of 2020. In the beginning of this March, myself and my coworker were assigned to set up a meeting room with coffee and scones, and clean it when it was finished. About 2 hours after I set up the meeting, my manager told me to go check to make sure that they still had enough coffee and whatnot. I was reluctant to walk in, as I just had a general sense that I shouldn't, and I could hear people crying inside the room. When I walked in, it looked like an AA meeting but with seniors, and the two hosts were the heads of the CC, the Continued Care Program. Basically, if you already have a disease like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, things like that, before you move in, they won't allow you to. However, if you develop one while you're a resident, you get sent to the CC wing once it's needed. The lady who was talking had half of her face looking like it was melted, and she was also drooling as she talked. She said she was being sent to CC, and that she wanted to be killed or die. The atmosphere in the room was palpable. Then, like the idiot I am, I asked the host if they had enough coffee and scones. She took me outside and yelled at me for being rude, but I told her my manager made me check. The host said it was fine then, but to please not come back until the meetings was over. When it was, my coworker and I were sent to clean the room up. We were both faced with the left wall closest to the door, stacking plastic cups, when a very intense wave of nausea came over me for about 5 to 10 seconds, almost making me vomit. Along with that was a feeling of dread, almost like I wanted to die or that I was convinced Elle was going to. After my nausea faded away, my coworker told me that she suddenly felt very nauseous too. That really creeped me the fuck out because I never even told her that I felt nauseous. I told her because I didn't want to freak her out. I never told her because I didn't want to freak her out. Until I left the room, there was a very uneasy feeling. The feeling you get when you're in a place you're not supposed to be in or lost in a building. I never saw anything or remember a temperature change of any kind, and I've been back into that room and nothing's happened. Maybe it was just a really strange coincidence. I don't really know. Apparently, I freaked out my friends and work colleagues at times. My dad was the ultimate skeptic and raised me to think the same. However, there's been a lot of weird happenings in my life. Some I put down to being observant of smaller signs, like the time I was having dreams and the company I was working for suddenly collapsed, leaving us out of work. I was laughing about it with one of my colleagues about the constant dreams. 3 weeks later, the company suddenly collapsed. My coworker asked me if I had any other feelings, so I told her that she was pregnant and my boss would be a father within a year. She denied it at the time, but came back 6 weeks later to tell me that she was 7 weeks pregnant at the time that she asked me, but didn't want to say anything until she reached the 12th week mark. However, with her, I'd noticed her not drinking alcohol at work functions a week before, so maybe I just picked up on the subtle signs about her and the signs about my boss. My boss and his wife had their first child about 8 or 9 months after the collapse. With the company collapse looking back, I remember staff expenses not being paid, payroll inexplicably not going through on time due to banking errors and other signs. Others are a bit more unexplainable, but where verified by people who remembered what I had said. A few examples are as follows. 1. The night I had a vivid dream about being out on a boat with a friend with diving gear. I hate boats, I can't swim very well, and I've never used diving gear, but I could smell the sea, feel the weight of the diving gear, and feel the boat rocking. A small plane flew overhead, crashed into the sea, and the plane sank with the pilot and passengers inside. My friend and I put back on our breathing gear, grabbed the extra tanks that we had with us and went down to go get the pilot and passengers out and brought them back up. I remember looking at a depth gauge on my wrist. We were almost to the plane and saw how the wreckage landed on the bottom. I told my friend that I'd shared an apartment about maybe the next morning. And she didn't know that I didn't like boats, and I knew that she would find it hilarious, which she did, until news broke of a missing plane. She thought I couldn't have picked up on I guess this particular thing, so she wrote down my description of the plane that had come overhead, the distance I remembered being from the shore, and the depth I remember diving down to. I had the distance from the shore, the depth of the water the plane was found in, the number of people in the plane, and pretty much the description of the plane itself. A few years later, a little girl in my country was reported missing by her mother and her mother's boyfriend. She was about the same age as my child. I was heading to work one morning and thinking of her, wishing that she could be safe from harm. I was taking a shortcut through a walking path going past trees, and I looked to the side that I swore I saw her in, standing next to an old half-open suitcase near the trees, just looking sadly at me. I looked at her and thought, "Where are you?" She just looked down at the suitcase and back up at me, and she was gone. We were talking at work about the disappearance. Everyone was worried and hoped that she would be found soon and safe. I mentioned I must be too wrapped up in this case due to having a child the same age, but how could I have sworn I saw her on my way back from work, standing in the trees next to a suitcase? Yeah, funny how your mind plays tricks on you when you really, really, really want to find someone safe and okay. 8 months later, her mother was arrested. It came out. She had been killed by her mother and put in a suitcase for days. She had then been buried in bushland. Rest in peace. 3. I was going to a dressy dinner function with my husband. The only dress I could find that I liked was a dark navy blue. I remember looking in the mirror and thinking, well, at least if I can't wear it for dinner, I can wear it for the funeral. And then thinking that was odd. No one I knew was ill, and I definitely wasn't going to a function that next night. That night, I got a call letting me know a family member was seriously ill and had been admitted to the hospital. I didn't go to the function, but went down to sit by their bedside. I was really worried, but after a week they came through it. They were released from the hospital and all was supposedly fine. I was speaking to a family friend after they came home and saying how worried I had been when I heard that they were ill in the story of the dress purchase and how glad I was so wrong. A week later, my family member was suddenly readmitted to the hospital and died the very next morning. At the funeral, the family friend came up to me, looked me up and down, and said, "So that is the dress?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, it is."